Welcome to video 2 of our multi-part tutorial series dealing specifically with Maya constraints. In the first video, we went over just basic things about a parent constraint and using an offset. I'm going to briefly describe some of the other constraints. I'll be missing one or two of them on purpose because those will be dealt with in a later video. But for now, I will focus on point constraints, orient constraints, and a further deep dive into parent constraining with keys, setting keys with a parent constraint. So one other thing I'd like to note is I've added a keystroke identifier as you can see in the bottom of the screen, and I'd like your feedback if you appreciate seeing this, because this will deliberately illustrate anything that I'm doing in Maya and including using my mouse. So if I'm scrolling wheel up or down, right clicking, it will only do double clicking for some reason, but left clicking is relatively easy to recognize for changing the object highlights and things like that, and selecting something in the outliner. It's pretty evident I'm selecting the left mouse button there. But if you like this visual aid for the tutorials, please let me know in the comments section. And while we're at it, please like the video. It helps with the YouTube algorithm. This is a new channel, so anything like that will help significantly. And if you enjoy this tutorial series, please subscribe. Now on with the tutorial. We're going to I'm going to briefly show you, let's go with a point constraint. Let me bring the menu up. Perhaps this is a better approach. I'm going to put the options menu. I'm going to reset it because this is going back to the default settings of point constraining. And what I'd like to do is show a point constraint without an offset when the objects are in different places. So I'm going to have this as the parent, this as the child of a point constraint, and I'm going to leave the offset feature turned off. When I hit apply, you'll see that the jelly bean has basically conformed to the axis of the plane. So wherever this axis is on this parent object, the child here will snap to it, and it will snap to it using its pivot axis. So there's the pivot axis of the jelly bean, and you'll see here it's in the exact same position as the plane. So that's how the point constraint with offsets work. If you needed to delete a constraint, you can, I'm going to go back to shaded mode here. That's 5 on the keyboard. If I wanted to get rid of this point constraint, because if I move this, you'll see that goes like that, and this will stay. So if I move it, and say I move this, it will snap back because the constraints are on the translates y, x, y, and z. So if I want to get rid of it, I just dive into this object here, the jelly bean. It's actually a sphere, and there we see the point constraint. We can just select it and delete it. Now when you move this, it will no longer follow, and so we can put this somewhere else. And then if we want this to stay, with an offset, we can do that. And of course, this is not a parent constraint. This is a point constraint with offset. What that means is, if I rotate this, this will not rotate. This is free to rotate because there are no constraints on the X, Y, and Z rotation value, channels of this child. And the only way this will affect the child is if we move. So that is the purpose of a point constraint. So there are very specific reasons to do this, and in the future I'll be able to give you some more examples. So moving on, I will show you an Orient constraint. And we will have the offset left alone. We're going to leave this on all, so it's X, Y, and Z. And we're going to move this, or rotate it, this direction, and we want this object to match what this one is doing. So this is the parent, this is the child. We do not have offset on. If we hit apply, this will now match. So you'll see on the child, we have now rotations X, Y, and Z all locked to this parent object. And if you rotate it, they will move precisely in every axis. So in the rotation values. And we'll just do the same routine with the cone. We're going to do it with an offset. So let's rotate this here, and we're going to make this stay here by clicking offset. And there we go. Now they're still going to match their relative change, but they're going to stay in their current orientation. So this is obviously needed for very specific reasons as well. In the future, we'll have tutorials to cover a scenario where this matters. So we'll leave those alone, and that's pretty well Orient constraining. And the last thing I'll show you is, actually, maybe I'll just show you the point constraint with no offset. I'm not sure if I revealed this, but if this is now the parent, we can still rotate this, and of course the cube does not rotate with this because it's a point constraint. So, you know, there might be reasons to do something like this if there's two objects that are uniquely joined, like a bearing and some sort of a covering that perfectly matches the circumference of another object. That could come in handy. And of course, when you move this, that will always be there. So no matter what you do, it'll always stay perfectly in the center. So that's a good example of that. And let's do one thing here. With this point constraint, we're going to decide to let this cube leave this donut or the torus. Let's just place a key here, and let's move it. Let's go somewhere here. So there's movement, and I'm hitting S, of course, to place a key. And let's say during this movement, we want the cube to leave or depart from its current holding. I can either select these three channels and hit S, or I can just hit S on all the channels. And you'll notice it added a blend BlendParent, because this is a point constraint. So what this means is this is either activating the constraint on or off. 0 is off, 1 is on. So if we wanted it to leave on this frame and to no longer follow the torus, this has to be set to 0. So we can place a key there. And I can scroll back one frame, and that's Alt, comma. And I can then, on this former frame, put this to 1. And I can place a key down. So what that means is everything from this frame backwards, the cube is following the torus. And once we hit the frame where this is back to 0, from this point on, the cube stays still. Now you'll notice there's still constraints on the cube, but because the blend point is at 0, we can now place this cube in new positions. So we can place it over here. Then you notice when I go backwards in time, oops, sorry, I had this highlighted, so that was my mistake. Unhighlight that, move this over here, and there we go. So now if we go back in time, you'll notice the cube has its own position even though it has a constraint, because this is at 0. So as we move back in time, you'll notice that the cube is slowly coming back towards the torus, and from this point on, the cube is now following the torus back to the beginning of the animation. And so what that means is even though there's a keyframe, let's see on my timeline, there's a keyframe over here and here showing that there's positions, all these positions will be ignored. So let's say I decided to put the cube over here at the beginning of the animation. Sure, it's going to place a key down, and you'll see it here in the graph editor. There's the new position. But if I start scrubbing, you'll notice the cube will snap right back in the torus. That is because this is at value 1. Let's just, there we go. I'll just hit a key here, see? This is at the value, let's remove this, value of 1. And whenever that's at 1, nothing here will matter. Now it will hold the information, but it will not allow the cube to go there until this goes to 0. So that's a very important thing to understand. And what this means is you can start placing keys under constraints or inside constraints to give you important information when the constraints go off. So let's take this one step further. Let's go over here, and let's say we have a small animation over here. It's a swinging cylinder, you know. They normally swing back and forth just like this. Typical thing they do. What we're going to do is we're going to make this cone stick right into this cylinder here. And it's going to stick right when it swings up here. So we're going to pick a frame like that. And let's go back to the beginning. I'm going to place a key. I hit S. Notice the red channels there. That's the first key placed. We're going to wait till it swings back up here. And we're going to go all the way over here. And we're going to say it sticks right there. So I'm going to make this kind of a linear move. we're going to break the tangent so it makes a very hard hit and it stops. And we're going to keep it linear so it's a shooting out from the beginning here, and it's going to stick. So now I want to start planning this out for a constraint. The best constraint I should do with this is probably a parent constraint. So we're going to have this stick in here, and then from this point on, it's going to follow the sphere. So I'm going to go back to this frame. We're going to go constraint, parent constraint. We'll just, for fun, reset everything. This is staying on, offset. We want this offset on, and we want all channels on the translates and rotates on. This will mean once I hit apply, the constraint will then matter, and it will start changing this channel box to blue for the Orients, translates and rotations. So I'm going to always click off here to keep all the channels open, and we're going to make this the parent, make this the child, and we're going to hit constraint. So notice now we see the blue color change in the channel box indicating a constraint is made, and here is the name of the object, which is this one right here, and we can even go on the outliner. I can hit F. Sorry, it's already been selected, and that's the parent constraint for this cone. So that's how you see it in the outliner, and that's how you see it here, and the object that it is parented to. So from this point, we're going to notice that the cone is staying with the cylinder, but before it strikes, oh, it's still there. That's a problem. So what we do is we go back to this frame where the cone connected, and we see we have a BlendParent node. There's currently no keys on it. So from this point on, it is connected. So we can key that. I'm going to hit Alt, comma, to scrub back just one frame. And we're going to put this back to 0. So now that means from this point on to the beginning of the animation, we have the cone doing its travel towards this. And notice it makes a very nice connection, and it does its thing. So now I'm going to make this cone fly off as if it has no more stickiness, and it decides to leave the cylinder, and it kind of gets flung off. So we'll make that happen, let's say right here. So we're going to keep this at 1. We're going to go back one frame before. Actually, at the same time, when I have this at 1, we want to make all of these channels keyed. So I'm going to hit S. Notice here in the graph editor, there's certain values that are changing because it's taking all those values from the world and it's applying it to this new position. But because the parent constraint is on, it is not going to leave the cylinder yet. We're going to now take that BlendParent off from... We're going to do it on this frame because this is where the keys are on the translates and rotates. So I'm going to go back one more key. I'm going to keep this at 1, and then I'm going to skip using the period key to this and put this at 0 now. So that means there's no more constraint active, but notice the cone did not move. That's because I did place a key here first. And that's important. That's where this comes into play. So now it understands that regardless of the constraint, these values are now valid for this cone. So from this point on, it no longer is connected to the cylinder. So this is very important now. Now you start to see where a constraint can still work while you have keys on the object that's constrained. So now I am free to animate this cone. And let's just say for fun, the cone flies forward and up. I'm just going to use the channel box to get a proper up value. And let's just say it goes back down and a little bit more further to this way. And since I only highlighted these two keys, it's only going to place the translate Y and the translate X in the graph editor here. And all the other channels are still empty because I haven't done a generic S key on all of these channels. So that's not important right now. I'm just wanting to make it look like it's flying. Just like that. And I forgot to do a down position. I'm going to find my last frame. There it is. So that's from the X translate. And we're going to go down with the Y. So that's just, there you go. Of course, we can always tweak these values. This is the best way to do it with a constraint, and that is to use this breaking the tangent button and the linear one. So you'll see the results here. See, it's going a little too fast, but that was just the choice I made, going too fast with this. Actually, I can slow it down a little bit. Oop. There you go. So anyway, this isn't an animation lesson. This is just for parent constraint tips. So now, here's something that happens often. You have all this information. You have keyframes on an object that has a constraint, and then maybe you get a note from your director, and they want this to rotate more. So instead of here, we want it to go up here. So when I scrub, everything looks fine here. Everything looks fine here. But then you're going to notice something happen. So when I scrub forward, the moment this starts to, actually, let me make one more edit so you can see this properly. Let's just say it swings out here as well. Okay. Oh, sorry. I always do that to myself. Okay, sorry. Let's go back to that up here. Okay. So now it's connecting, it's connecting, it's connecting, and then now the cone is going to leave. You're going to notice something happen. It's all the way up there. Oh, and now the cone has popped off. So remember these two keys here we made of the cone position. Now, really, it's one key on the position and orientation. That's all here. Notice that in the graph editor, okay? So we just need to change this position. So how are we going to do that and still make a seamless departure from this cone, from the cylinder here, the way it departs? We want it to be a smooth transition again. So what we can do is put this parent blend back to 1. We'll key it. We'll just unhighlight this. Now we're back to normal. Now watch what happens in the graph editor right here. When I hit S again, everything has changed. New values have come up here. So what has happened is in the world space, this cone now has new values from the translates and rotates because I placed a key down. Now the parent constraint is still on the blend parent, but we're going to now turn it off. We're going to put this back to 0. And look, the cone didn't move. That's because we placed those keys first. Okay? So now, when we scrub, we now have the cone doing what it was doing before, except it is leaving in the new position that this is now in. So this is a very important bit of information for constraining, that you can always update your constraint start and end positions as long as you do things in the correct order. So if I needed to make this leave on this frame instead of here, all I have to do is I could just move these keys over. Now it won't be completely fixed yet, but we just do one tricky little step. So you notice how it's still doing that pop. So all we have to do is put this back to 1, key it, unselect it, hit key, and turn the blend parent back off, and here we go. Now we have a perfect departure of the cone, no longer popping. It is now repositioned in the new timing that the cone is leaving the cylinder. So for whatever reason you need to change the timing of a constraint, you can do that simply by the BlendParent on or off switch. So that pretty well wraps it up for this tutorial. This is quite a lot of information, so if you have any questions, do not hesitate to leave a comment. I encourage you please to share this video to anyone who's learning Maya. Constraints are something that are widely misunderstood. Not a lot of people understand that you can key with a constraint on, and there's good reasons to do it. I'll give further examples in the future, but if you like this video series so far, please subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you get notifications when I have new tutorials coming. And this is the first of many tutorials, and they'll be covering a variety of subjects relating to animation and technical rigging and things related in that field. Thank you very much for your time.